Arise, transcend thyself, thou art man, and the whole nature of man is to become more than himself.
A very good evening to respected Alokda, Anjali ma'am, Romini ma'am, Archana ma'am, teachers, and my dear students. Welcome to the second session of Day 8 of Spiritual Retreat 2021. It's my great honor and privilege to welcome our esteemed guest, Dr. Alok Pandey, who is going to talk about the art and science of life and followed by question answer session. Dr. Alok Pandey is a psychiatrist by profession and a philosopher by temperament. His search for a deeper meaning in life while confronting the enigma of death, disease, and suffering led him at the feet of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. It is in their writings that he found the most perfect answers he was looking for. Since then, he has been trying to practice the way of integral yoga as developed by Sri Aurobindo. He has worked with the Indian Air Force in various capacities before taking premature retirement at the rank of wing commander for settling down in the vicinity of the Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Pondicherry. He offers his services at the ashram dispensary and is also associated with a number of projects as part of the Integral Health Center of the Sri Aurobindo Society. He is a co-editor of the Health Quarterly magazine published by the Sri Aurobindo Institute of Integral Health and Research titled Namaha, New Approaches to Medicine and Health. He is also the editor of a monthly magazine, AIM, All India Magazine, published by the Sri Aurobindo Society. He has also authored 3 books titled Death, Dying and Beyond, Patient at the Crossroads, and Veda of the Body. He has held several workshops and written and spoken extensively on various themes such as yoga, psychology, health, education in India and abroad. I welcome Dr. Alok Pandey.
Before we go on to the proposed subject, or rather, we'll take up this subject from this angle. You see, nowadays, we have schools, we have books, we have exams through which we are supposed to learn about different fields, specialties. And when we have passed the exams, we are supposed to take up a profession and be proficient and earn some money, livelihood, make a living, get married, have children, get settled, whatever that means. And at the end of it, much later, we wonder, what did we really learn from all this? What is this journey about? So let me take ourselves to far back times when possibly there were no schools, there were no books. How did man learn? He learned. That's how he has grown so far. What was the means of education? And the reason for undertaking this exercise is so that we understand what we have lost in counting the trees, the sight of the forest. So, when there are no books, when there is no school, when there are no teachers, do we learn and grow, or we don't learn and grow? Well, we do. How do we learn and grow? We look at this world through all these senses, we receive the world. Imagine if there were nobody to tell you what's a tree, what's a animal, what's the sky and sea. And when we look at these things, we'll feel amazement and wonder, and we would want to know about them. But this knowledge that we would want to have is not just an intellectual and utilitarian knowledge. We would like to just understand. Maybe we'll go near, we'll look at it, we'll try to come in contact in some way, and that way, slowly a kind of understanding of what the tree is, what the sky is, will inspire a kind of vision, a kind of feeling inside us. It will evoke a feeling inside us. And through those feelings, slowly we'll come in contact with the being of the tree or the mountains, the rivers, sitting by the side, by reflecting upon life. We learn a lot. What has happened today is that we don't have questions. So I keep reminding that please don't go by the questions which are there in the book. We read a book, we raise questions, or other questions are also there in the book. We have standard answers, and that's how we proceed. That's not how we learn the book of life. It's important to understand. Say, for instance, you are picking up a subject. What is it that you want to know? Let's say that there is a book and you read about physics or biology or languages, any subject you can take up. Raise your own question. What do you want to know about it? Of course, the book will have chapters. It'll tell you all about structure of an atom and laws of Newton, etc., etc. What do you want to know about it? Is there something that you want to know about a subject? When you look at the sky, what do you want to know about the sky? Do you want to know why is the color blue or golden or different colors? Why? What is lying beyond the skies? Is there something which goes beyond the skies? Just imagine for a while. When you look at the river, what do you learn looking at the river? Every day we have so many ways of learning because the teacher, that's the biggest teaching that we receive from the ancient Indian thought, that the teacher is within us. And if we seek to learn, he will teach us in 100 ways. What does he teach? He teaches the book of life. And the first chapter of that book of life is, who am I? That is the first chapter. This chapter is not given anywhere. So, who am I? It's a path of constant discovery. But even before we do that, just look at a daily routine. When we wake up in the morning, we look at the sun. So, what does the sun teach us? The sun teaches us many things. One of them is that there is no night which does not end. That even when there is night, sun is still there. We don't see it. We have turned away. That's why we don't see. Many people say we don't see God. Maybe we have just turned our eyes in the wrong direction. That's why we don't see Him. At night, there is the sun, but the earth is facing in another direction. So we don't see. Or we may make it even more complete because God is everywhere and in everything. Probably we are seeing the sun in a different way at night, veiled by the darkness. So also we may be seeing God in different moods, in different ways. Sometimes He comes close to us in one way, which is very much to our liking. And sometimes we don't recognize Him because He is hidden behind a veil which we normally don't associate God to be there. Like night, we don't associate God to be in the night. Now, somebody would say that, well, how is the sun there in the night? Think about it. Is the sun there in night? Any child? Not just about turning. Is He there at night in a very tangible way? I'll tell you how He is there. So, what happens in the night? You have some light in the sky. Where does the light come from? The main source of this light in the night is from the moon. So, what is the light of the moon? It is a light reflected from the sun. So, even when it is veiled, even when there is night, still the sun is trying to reach out to us in some way or the other. And if we look at sun not just as a form, but as representing the source of light for planet Earth, then you see the same light is there in the stars, the same light is there in the moon, the same light is there in the fire that we tend, and the same light, as the great scriptures tell us, is within us. What is this light within? Very simply, this light within is what makes us understand about things. So if we don't have this light within, then we cannot understand. Even when something is very much visible, something is there in the book, something someone is telling us, still it is with this light that we understand. Now look at a very interesting event that took place. When you just look at history of mankind, when we look at things very beautifully, we can learn so many things. Where is fire? So we will say, okay, we'll take a visible image and we'll say this is fire. Is there fire in stones? Now, is there fire in stones, children? Well, the first people who discovered fire discovered it by rubbing the stone. What does it mean? Fire is everywhere, even where it is not visible. Just the same way God is everywhere, even inside stone. There is music, there is fire, there is light. Only we need a way, we need to find a way to bring out that light and fire which is inside the stone. So, what used to happen? How did people discover fire? We don't know whether they did it accidentally. Probably first time it happened accidentally. They were probably trying to rub stones with each other. Suddenly they saw sparks flying, and then these sparks, there was some wood which caught fire, and they discovered fire. So something similar happens within us. All the experiences of life are like the rubbing of the stone. And by the rubbing of this stone, time to time, a glint, a spark here and there flies. And if there is something in us which is ready, it catches fire, and we have glimpse of the divinity within us. So, if we look at things correctly, we'll discover that actually this fire is even inside the most dumb block of stone that we see. So there are two sides of things, one which is visible and expressed, and the other is where it is hidden and unexpressed. So a lot of things are hidden and unexpressed within us, and through contact with life, through contact with the experiences, through contact with our teachers, our books, it is meant ultimately to bring out this which is hidden inside. This is the whole purpose of education, because one may read many books, perform very well, but at the end, all this exercise will be meaningless if it has not brought out the true knowledge which is within us. We may have the best stones in the world, but that which brought out the fire from within, that is the real thing. So all this is the very purpose. Then when we look at the hills and the mountains, what do we learn? We learn about the beauty of staying firm in whatever, there is something in us which should be able to stay firm regardless of all the changes in life. But what often flows from the heart of the mountain, you will see that there are rivers which flow either from the mountain or mountain tops, or they will circle around the mountains. Very often you will see. So it's very beautiful. The mountains and the river beautifully reveal to us the secret of the unchanging, stable reality and the ever changing world. So, if you want to be a powerful catalyst for change, see, you'll be grow up tomorrow, and I'm sure you will want many things to change. You must, because that's how life evolves. So, to bring the power for change, it's important to discover the mountain within. If we don't discover the mountain within, the power of change that we'll bring will be very, very small. So it's important to understand that everywhere in life there are these two things. One is the firm, unchanging, stable basis. So all of us must discover this firm, unchanging, stable basis within us. It may be our will, it may be something at our core. And on that basis, you will see that they will flow in all our actions the power for change. That is the river of life, which is constantly flowing, constantly flowing. So rivers teach us about change. And how does rivers flow? They teach us something else very beautiful. They teach us that you must know where you are coming from, and you must know where you are going. That's a very important lesson of life, because if you don't know where I have to go, life will be very miserable. Often I give this example that imagine you were on a railway station or an airport, and you didn't know where you have to go. So what would you do? Will you wait for somebody to tell you, let's take this train because I want to take this train? Will you decide which train you will take depending on how many people are traveling in that train? Will it be decided by numbers? How absurd it would be if you gave this logic that there are 1,000 people traveling in this train, so I must take this train. Somebody will tell you, but where do you want to go? So you just can't say, I'll go wherever everybody is going. So in life, when you make a choice, you must choose your destination. Maybe others have a different destination. You need not go on that destination. So it's important. You see, the word destination and destiny, they are so closely connected. People often say that, my destiny is like that, somebody's destiny is like that. If you want to master your destiny, know your destination. Your destination is your destiny. And if you are clear about the destination, then all that will happen in our life will be a means to take us to that destination. That is what destiny will be. Destiny operates in a way that it ends up fulfilling our destination. So let us be very clear. Where do we want to go? This is the first thing necessary. First is, who am I? Second is, where do I want to go? So people often wonder, who am I? Am I not? Normally you will say, I am a product of my parents. Now look at it. Yes, immediately it is true that our bodies are formed by our parents, and our minds are shaped by our teachers and parents and society. And there is something else that we bring our own. But just do a little backward trail. Where did our parents come from? We'll say grandparents, from entire tree, monkeys. Ultimately, where will we go back? Last spot, we'll go back to the starting point of creation. So, what is there before creation? Doesn't matter what you call, it will be the creator. So, who is our parent, really speaking? Our immediate parents are our parents, biological parents, whom we regard and we must, because they have formed a body. But if we look deep within, we'll discover that all of us have the same parent. And who is that same parent? It is the creator. Because in everything, you will go back to the origin. But what a wonderful parent. What do we discover when we discover this parent, who is our true parent, the creator? We discover that we are all one family. My family is not decided by my surname. There is but one creator. So, not only human beings, not only my friends, not only my family members, the animals, the birds, the bees, the bushes, the earth, the star, they are all my family. What does it mean? It means I have a huge house, mansion given to me. Some people feel my house is small, they want a bigger house, etc., etc. Just imagine that the whole universe is your house. Can you imagine? What does it mean? It means that in your house at night, there are millions of stars which light up, which provide a very nice backdrop for us to sleep. And in my house, there are many, many swimming pools, the rivers, the ponds, the seas, and there are every kind of beings who are our friends. So if we look at life and if we deal with all creatures as friends, see, it's our own mindset tends to affect the other people, we don't realize. So if we deal with everything in life, the plant, the trees, the animals, even hostile animals, animals which are fierce, there are many instances to show that if we deal with them with the feeling they are all our friends. There are instances where even poisonous snakes have behaved as if they were friends. They would not harm. Why? Because within us, this consciousness that they are going to harm is not there. Especially, you will see when we are little children, we don't have this idea. But as we grow up, we start putting world, people, everything into slots. And as a result, it becomes like a self fulfilling prophecy. So, if we look at life with this idea that we are all one large family, that we are all friends, then life would be wonderful. Very often, I see that there are people who say, "But I am not fit. I am, what can I do in life? I am a failure. I can't do much. Look at the other person." You see, it's look at life. It'll teach us all this. Where does lotus grow? Lotus grows in a pond which is full of slush and mud and mire. So if in a place which is full of slush and mud and mire, beautiful lotus can emerge. So also within us, we do not know. Maybe there are lotus seeds we have not explored. So always in life, we can look at either the slush and the mud, or we can look at the possibility of the lotus. So life is defined by what you believe it to be, not what actually is. If you believe that life is beautiful, it can be wonderful, then you will end up realizing the beauty and wonder of life. But if one believes, as some people do, unfortunately, that, oh, life is useless, everybody is a thief, everybody is a scoundrel, then as we grow up, we see only that part. There is a something known as kaleidoscope, where you see different angles, you will see different things. So life is like that. It depends on what angle we see. If we see it from one angle, it will look very beautiful. If you see from another angle, it look very challenging but beautiful. But if you see from another angle, we look at a burden of troubles. So we have to learn to develop the right kind of eye, the right sight to look at life. Look at trees, look at a flower and learn from them. So much, mother says, when we look at a flower, we can learn how to be beautiful, smiling, cheerful. See flowers, whether you appreciate them or not, they bloom, they give beauty, they give radiance, they give fragrance. They don't ask who is the one who is going to receive it, how much money will you give me to be, to just bloom and be good. Well, that's how we should be. Like a flower, just bloom. It doesn't matter who will appreciate, who will not appreciate, what you will get, what you will not get. You will have the joy of fulfilling what you are here for. So each of us is a unique flower. All are flowers, but each one is unique. Why should all flowers be the same? Imagine a world where there is only one variety of flower. Won't it be a very boring world? Only one variety of flower, one color, one variety. All red roses. After some time, you'll get sick and tired. So we have variety in this world. And that's what makes this world so beautiful. So we are each a particular variety of flower. But one type of flower should not try to become like another flower, because then it loses its own joy. A rose is a rose, a sunflower is a sunflower, the grass is a grass, and each of them has its place and beauty. Roses are admirable, beautiful, but without a flower, can you imagine roses growing in a place where there is no grass? It will look very strange. Grasses are the backdrop against which these flowers will look good. So when we look at life, we will see that all of us have our own beautiful place, and we must explore that. So that's how we must end up discovering ourselves. One, our common parentage, which is none else but the Creator. Second, within us, what is the intent of the Creator? What are we meant to be? What is the place we are meant to occupy? It's not like everybody is doing this, so let us do the same thing. Again, if everybody did the same thing, the world would be such a boring place. So there is variety. It's not necessary that everybody must do the same thing. In fact, it should not be like that. So we have to explore what is the will of the Creator within us. What does He want us to do? What does He want us to be? And for that, it's very important to take out some time, sit quiet and reflect. Reflect on the meaning. Obviously, we may not be able to immediately find the meaning. Ask the Creator. He is within us, with us. Tell Him, I want to know. What do I want to do? Be like a child. Just as we ask questions to the teacher, we can ask Him. He will answer. How will He answer? He will not answer in a human language. He may or may not. You may be contemplating that I want to know what am I meant for. He may make a human being come near and speak to you something, and you may say, oh yes, this is what I was thinking about. Or suddenly you may have thought about it and thrown this question at the Creator, and when you go back, you may open a book, or suddenly you may see a phrase written somewhere, and you will say, oh yes, this is the answer to my question. Have you experienced this sometimes? So these are the ways that Creator speaks to us. Or it may not be even that. You may feel that you have forgotten that question, and suddenly you feel a kind of inner direction in your life. You feel like this is what I should do. You develop certain kind of interest in a certain direction. You are led, and that's how we will slowly discover ourselves. So this is a long process of discovery. So what should we be? We should be what the Creator wants us to be. And for that, we must throw back the question to the Creator, and He will answer. He is the only person who will answer without fail. And He will answer not in one way, because He knows our limitations. He will answer it in countless ways. Only we have to heed and we have to follow. But if we insist that I want to sit in the train or the compartment where everybody is sitting and going, then that's a different story. Why? Because then in a compartment where there are thousands of people, you won't be able to hear even if he comes and says. So always it's wonderful to spend some time alone in quietude. It's not about learning a method, technique, nothing. God does not care about our techniques and methods. He wants to be our friends. Actually, we did a great mistake by shutting him in a temple, a mosque, a gurudwara, church. Poor fellow. We have made him so far away from us. And then we say that only by this particular mantra we can invoke him. By this particular book we can find him. This priest, he is going to take us to God. And you know what God feels? He feels like running away from all these places. Probably he has run away from all these places. But it's so boring, no? He created the world for companionship. If you go back to the original, the Upanishads say, why did God create this world? So they say because he wanted to be many. What is this many? He wants to be friends like him. He wants us to be like him. Just imagine it. He wanted many. He was alone. He was, we can put it in a way that, he was getting very bored. What is this? I am all alone. So he said, okay, I'll become many. So he wants us to be friends. But you will see that all kinds of relations we talk about with God, but we don't talk about him as friend. Of course, in India, we have God as friend. You see the example of Arjuna and Krishna, many other examples. So make God your friend. And what happens when he becomes the friend? You don't have that awe, fear, distance. With whom do we have awe, fear, and distance? Who is somebody like, who will threaten us, punish us? Does God punish? Ask your heart. Do you really believe he can punish? Isn't it strange, absurd? Why would he punish? We have done a mistake. We are, great sinners, so he'll punish us? No. If we have made mistakes, he knows that we are learning. So he helps us to grow and progress. So he doesn't punish. This word, few words don't exist in God's dictionary. They exist in our dictionary. And we believe that because they exist in our dictionary, they exist in God's dictionary also. For instance, is there anything impossible for God? No. When we say that he is all capable, but it exists in our dictionary. You say, no, this he can do, this he cannot do. This is something which is not possible for him. So we create certain barriers. Drop these barriers. Connect with him everywhere. Where is he found? He is found everywhere. That's what all the teachings say. We carry it within us. So if we really look at it, this should be our first preoccupation, to establish within us a kind of contact with the divine or God, doesn't matter what word we use, and to know that this is our true identity. Once we know this identity, our true identity, then what are we meant for? So what are we meant for? No book, no teacher, nobody can tell us. We have to feel inside. Am I meant to be a rose? Am I meant to be a sword? Am I meant to be a mountain? Am I meant to be a river? Be that. That's the beauty of creation. And that impulsion we'll discover inside when we observe our tendencies, when we observe our deep interest, what engages us most. The biggest problem is when we are driven with the idea that outer success. Success is not, how much money we earn, or whether we have gone and competed in an exam and come first or second. Do you remember all this? Nothing, no? About all the people around. Do you ask your teacher, ma'am, how many examinations you competed and succeeded in? Do you ask your mom and dad how many percentage marks you got? You don't ask that. For a mom, the success is to be a wonderful mom. Isn't it? As a mom, that's what is a success. To be a teacher, the success is to be a wonderful teacher. It doesn't matter what marks and what background, all this at the end of the day doesn't matter. To be a doctor, success is to be a good healer. So this is how success is defined by that which we are meant to be we become that in the most perfect way. So, for that, we must spend some time in contemplation, quietly, sit quietly. That time, leave everything aside. Nothing much, 10 minutes is enough. And just raise this question: I want to know what I'm meant to do, what I'm meant to be. And you'll see that from within, something will come out. Seek that core inside. What is my core? What moves me most? And then you'll discover that this what moves me most. Nobody else can answer that for you. You have to answer it for yourself. But question has to be raised. This is the second part. And then that will give us a direction of where we are going. So ultimately, this where we are going is another very important question. Where we are going, meaning thereby not what we are today. Most of us are focused on what we are today or what we were yesterday. Focus on what we want to be. Just the entire concentration is, for instance, if there is an illness, so, what is our concentration? Our concentration is over what is this illness about? What is going to happen? What medicine should I take? Leave that aside. Focus on only one thing, that I want to be healthy. That's all. With every thought, every feeling, every strand of will, say, I want to be healthy. And if such be the state, then you will see that the body will find ways and means to be healthy. Everything else will conspire toward that end, whatever time it takes. So this is how we need to read the book of life. It is there in everything. Then there are certain laws of life that we need to know. One of them is what we have heard about, you see, explained in a very different way. It is about the law of karma. What we do comes back to us. Now, what is this law? This law is not about reward and punishment. It means that whatever energies we release into the world, that tends to increase, meaning thereby whatever we pay attention to, that will increase. For instance, if we are cruel, then cruelty will increase within us. If we are kind, the power of kindness will increase within us. So when we are kind, the power of kindness increases, and then everybody who is around us tend to become kind to us simply because we are releasing that energy into that person, even if the person is not kind. By the very fact that we are kind, it will go, and for a moment, at least momentarily, that kindness will begin to influence the person. So we have to decide whatever we are releasing into the world is what eventually will increase within us. Whatever energy. Now, with this background, we can enter into this main subject: what really is a human being? So we can look at human being as a vehicle. Let us look at it that a vehicle has, let's say, somebody who is using a car. So one, there is a vehicle, meaning thereby there is a car, and then there is the energy feeder, and then there is the driver, and then there is the person who is traveling in the car. So this is how we can understand ourselves in our totality. So what is the vehicle? Vehicle is the body. Whatever you want to do, wherever you want to go, it is in the car that we have to travel. That is the body. So if the body is not taken care of, if the body is not kept fit, then we may want to do many things, but we won't be able to do them. So it's so important to take care of the body, to give it, fitness, have time for exercise, right kind of food, sleep. All this is part of keeping your vehicle well. Otherwise, if the vehicle breaks down frequently, then we won't be able to undertake the journey of life. Then very often it is asked, just before we started, ma'am was mentioning rightly about the vital. What is the vital? Vital is the energy that drives the vehicle. So we have, usually most of our vehicles are still running on the old forms of energy. Let's for a moment see what are the kinds of energy that we have. One is we derive energy from food, isn't it? So again, you will see, if you make a study, there are foods which give us a very light feeling. For instance, when we eat fruits, it gives us a very light feeling. It never falls heavy. And then if we eat a very strong, spicy food, look at the effect of that. Or if we eat food which is very heavy, high-end food, then it tends to make us sleepy. So there are different kinds of foods which provide us, even from the same food, different kinds of energy. Then there is an energy which comes from the breath. And then there is an energy which comes from feelings. Have you noticed that there are times when we have eaten well, everything is fine, but we don't have the energy and the enthusiasm? Experience this state. And if you ask, why are you dull like this? Then you will hear, oh, I'm not feeling all right. I'm feeling depressed. So, what happens when one is depressed? The energy system goes on a shutdown. It's a very heavy kind of energy. But when you are happy in the heart, what happens? Even with less food, even with less everything, you can do a lot more work. So, feelings are one form of energy. Then there is another kind of energy which comes from thought. So, sometime when we are busy engaged in solving a problem, mathematical problem, or something very interesting, or reading a story which is very interesting, have you noticed that you forget that it's your time for food, that you are hungry? Why? Because we are getting energy from thought. So there are so many kinds of energies, and the highest and purest form of energy which people have found is the spiritual energy that comes when we sit quietly and contemplate upon God. So these are all different kind of fuels. Now, just as there is a relation between the fuel and the car, so also there is a relation between the body and the type of energy that we draw in. There are bodies which we have got so used to a kind of very basic rudimentary energy, animal energy. Have you seen that energy comes from music, from the sights, what we see? It can make us aha feeling, or it can make us feel very low. Similarly, the music which can give us a very immediate urge to dance and shake, whereas there are music which make us very quiet. So all these, this is a whole world of energy. Even there are plants which are known to give beautiful energy, and if you're very tired, to sit below these plants helps. And similarly, there are plants, if you sleep below them, you tend to fall sick. So it's a whole science of dealing. There are human beings whose company will give you very good energy. That's why it was so important. This used to be one of the things which was described in ancient times. It's so true. The word used to be satsang. Satsang is not just sitting together and, you know, chatting over some spiritual matters or a scripture. Satsang means the company of truths, company of the wise, company of good people. So when we have the energy that will flow into us will depend on the company we keep, whether it be company through WhatsApp, chat box, or company through mail, or physical company. So if we really want a good form of energy, then we must be in the company of people who are really good, who exude beautiful energy. And if we are in the company of people who are full of all kinds of thoughts and feeling, we think it's okay, we are friends. But then what happens is that we are invaded by energies which are not good for us. They will all the time. So that's why it's so important to remember that this feeder energy, that's what the vital is. The more refined it is, the better the car will run. The cruder it is, the shorter will be the more difficult the upkeep of the car. It'll break down very frequently. So it's so important. You see, when there is an illness, nowadays it is said social distancing. When there is a virus, when somebody is not well, you tend to stay away, isn't it? Imagine if you look into a person with thoughts and feelings which are of a very, very horrible kind. So you should be careful. Otherwise, there'll be a tendency to get contaminated. So, but still, we cannot always avoid it, because this is the world. You cannot always avoid mixing meeting. So what should we do? We should use a filter inside us. So when you drink water, you take air, you use a filter, isn't it? So what is that filter through which you should let everything pass? It is the name of God. So when you take the name of God, when you are meeting with people, remember God in the background. Then automatically you will see that everything that enters will get filtered. He will ensure that the beautiful things come, because everything has something beautiful, and whatever is harmful is kept away. That's why when it is said, remember God, it means that we are basically creating a beautiful filter between us and the world. So it's a very practical thing to do. It doesn't matter what name, what way you remember God, it's your own personal connect. Don't go that you have to remember him in this very way. That is too boring, as I said, for God also. So you connect with him in your own way. See, in Indian thought, we have so many ways with which we take the name just of someone like Krishna. So many kind of names. Even there are names which are, scandalizing name, Makhanchor, Ranachor. Have you heard the name of God like that? How can you call him Makhanchor? But he responds to that. So basically, there are so many ways you can connect. Each name is a way of connecting to an attribute of the divine. And when you connect through that as a friend, then he becomes our filter. He surrounds us. And then between us and the world, there is a beautiful filter, a beautiful buffer. So that is how we should go through life, this energy. And then whatever energy which comes will automatically get purified. So we have to understand, we have to first make a study. What are these different kinds of energy? See what happens when you hear heavy music, when you watch. There are people who watch horror movies, and then they'll reveal much later. As a psychiatrist, I see this very often. They say that, uncle, I got depressed, I'm having anxiety attacks, all these. So when you trace it back, so they come out with the horror tale of enjoying a horror movie. There is this strange attraction sometimes. So obviously, when you watch a horror movie, we think it's a film and we are enjoying it. But actually, it's not just film, or everything is an energy system. It is throwing a kind of energy. And after the film is over, those 3 hours or whatever, even half an hour, that energy remains. What is a horror movie throwing an energy of fear? Fear is also a form of energy. Love, very beautiful, powerful energy. So all these energies are going on, they are circulating in the world, but it is up to us what we choose. When we watch a horror movie, the energy of fear is entering us. And when energy of fear enters us, then it makes us prone to all kinds of illnesses. So this is how we refine the vital, by studying the different kinds of energy and their effect upon us. Then we choose. So there are more refined forms of energy to which we need to open. And most importantly, whatever we are, as we go through this world, we'll have no choice. Many things we cannot avoid. And in that case, to take the name of God is the best way to filter out all these energies as they go inside us and they change their form. They change from their ugly to a most beautiful form. So this is the basic thing that we need to understand about the vital. But then vital and the physical is like the car and the energy. Where does it go? Now that has to be decided. That's where the driver is. Who is the driver? The driver should be our buddhi. Nobody else decides for us. It's an age when we love autonomy and freedom. And what is freedom? Freedom is to choose where you want to go. So very often we say that I am choosing, but basically still our choices are by all that is around us. So we need to make our choices. So how will the buddhi make a choice? The ability to discern, it will make a choice based on where I want to go. So if I am clear I want to go there, then I'll take a direction which will lead me there. But if I don't know where I want to go, then how will the driver choose? So who decides where I have to go is something within us. That's the owner of the car. So you must decide, where do I want to go? At the end of the day, what is my life going to be? In one, what will be the story about? The story of life. So tell yourself a story. Make a story of your life. Instead of reading all other stories, also good. What story you want to tell about your life? And at the end of the day, what is it that will be your role in the story? And when you have made a story of life, then you will get some idea about where you want to take your life. And then slowly, as we grow, this buddhi will tell us you have to go this way, you have to go that way, because that's your destination. So this is what completes our entire, what we call as ourselves. There is the body, which is the car. There is the energy, which is the fuel which is running in. There is the driver, which is the buddhi, the mind, which is rightly, when it's trained to choose. And there is the traveler in the car. And the traveler in the car is the soul. But before we discover the soul, it's not simple, though, we may use very simple terms, but at least every one of us should discover deep within what is zone, which is a very quiet zone. And in that quiet zone, you will get something like a little light shining there, something like a little peace. And that peace, some kind of an indication about whatever life should be. So, this is how we should understand our totality and then go through life. But most important thing, which is we must remember, and that comes right from the Gita, don't forget to take God with you. You must say it's very strange. God is everywhere. How can I forget to take God with you, with us? Well, that's the whole problem, the catch. So let me tell you a little story, a page from the diary of God. God writes in his diary, I went to meet so and so in the morning, and I was waiting when he will wake up and we'll greet each other. But what happened when he woke up? He woke up and he didn't even look at me. He rushed to the mirror to see himself, and then he went into the bathroom and shut me out. So I waited outside. When he came, again I waited that maybe, we can have a little chat now. But he was too busy with his breakfast. He was too busy dressing up. And then I waited, and then he rushed out and went into his car to the school or the office, wherever. And then again I went after him and I waited. But he went inside an office and shut me out. And I waited that in the evening when the work is over, then I'll meet him. But he was too occupied with so many problems, and he was so busy with the television and with everything else that he even did not acknowledge my presence. And then the same story repeated at night. What does it mean? God was all the time with us. And yet, if we do not acknowledge his presence, it is like when we are sitting with somebody. Have you felt this experience? That when you are sitting with someone who is your good friend and you're busy with WhatsApp or you're busy with a television program, what happens? What does your friend feel? Does he feel you're with him, or he feels you're not with him? It feels you're not with him. So this is how, though the God is all the time with us, we need to carry him, meaning thereby we need to acknowledge time to time. And that is why in the ancient Indian tradition, we had this way that before we eat, before we sleep, whatever you may be doing, just remember him for a short while. It is not necessary that you do it with a mantra, closed eyes, sit bolt straight. All that doesn't want. When you wake up in the morning, just say, Hi God, how are you doing? How was your day? Busy, huh? Say like that, be like a friend. So, how was the night managing this whole universe? Must be great, isn't it? Be a little funny, loves humor. Okay? See, you will feel joy. You will feel his presence right there. You will feel his smile when you treat him like a real living God. Huh? Not like you sit in the morning, bolt straight, and then say, Oh Lord of the universe, thou, my Father, who are there and here. Don't say all this. He finds it very boring besides. Huh? Be a little creative and innovative. He's so creative. See, no two leaves are the same. So treat him like a real living presence. Be creative. It's not like he will say, No, you say in Sanskrit, I will listen to you. Otherwise, I won't. Or you say in Gurmukhi or whatever language, then only I'll acknowledge your presence. No, whatever language, it's okay. But treat him like a real living person. Somebody who is with you all the time. And then when you go to the washroom, how do you take God with you? You say, you know what, this shower, I'm cleaning myself. Please enter this water and clean me of all the, my night was so heavy. Then you'll feel him flowing through with the water. So when we were children, we used to have this sloka was taught to us. I never did it myself, but I understand you don't have to use the sloka, but the essence, yes, that we used to do. So when you pour water, so what do? People used to recite a sloka. Ganga, Jamuna, Kaveri. We had a shortcut, and the reason was it used to be cold well water, no geyser. So what do you do with a cold well water when you are taking at night? In the morning when you are taking a bath, you have to get ready. So with those, lota, you have to take a bath. So you get ready and then you say Har Har Gange, Har Har Gange, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, because you want to quickly finish the whole thing. So, so when you take a bath, you say that let the Ganges come here. People say that you need to have Ganges to wash your whatever. Ganges will come. She will come. She will. When you take a shower, now it's so easy. Take a shower and just take it that it is God's love flowing, His light which is flowing, cleansing us. Then when you dress up, just don't forget for a moment when you stand in the mirror, say, hey God, how do I look? Is it okay? And when you eat, just before you are going to put the morsel in your mouth, pause for a moment and just inwardly make a gesture. Acha, why don't you taste it first? Just make him taste it first. As if he is sitting next to you and actually you're making him taste and then eating. See if we live life like that. When you are going in the car, you are going to the school, take him along. He'll be very happy. He'll even take your basta, your bag, sit with you. He loves fun, by the way. If he didn't love fun, he won't have created this world. Okay. A lot of fun in this world. And then in the classroom, you can take him. Some people get very tense, this examination, this question. They have forgotten to carry him. That's the whole problem. Tell him, just be by my side, quietly. Nobody will notice you. Just make sure. If the examiner sees you, he'll throw you out. So he'll say, don't worry, I know how to remain incognito. So every time you have a difficult question, you just can't understand, you're getting tense, using your pencil and pen, just stay quiet and say, God, please enter my hands, flow through my pen. See, no, I can't remember, I have a mind block. Why don't you clear all this? And you see the magic. Life will become a magic. It is a magic. It is a marvel. If we learn to live with this sense of God along with us, and when you go to the playground, tell him, be my strength. Make me play the best cricket in the world. And then ask him at the end, how was it? And you will see, he will tell you, he will show where you need to improve and everything. And then at night, when you're sleeping, so just tell him. When you're reading, tell him that be my intelligence. I can't understand all these complicated things that human beings have created. But you have created this complicated universe. Why did you create it with so many laws that we have to study? He will tell you, I didn't create laws. I didn't want you to study all these things. So he'll ask, then what did you want us to study? I just want to be friends. Life is made for that. To be happy. Just be happy together. You mean we don't need to know? Yes, you need to know, but not like this. What you will need to know, I'll tell you. So when you make God your friend, you will see that what you need to know, you will tend to know. In one way or the other, it will come to you. I'm not saying that close all the books and stop appearing for tests. As of now, we are not yet having a God-centered schools. Okay? But that's all the book of life, no? That's how children learned in far back times when there were no schools. So by all means, go to school, study. Tell him that be in my intelligence. See, what is the Gayatri Mantra about? It's about asking God to give you intelligence in very simple terms. Do we need to do exactly that mantra? You may if you like, but you need not if you don't want it like that. Just say that, be my intelligence. You think he won't understand? He will say, no, go back, pick up your Gayatri Mantra, say it this way, then only I'll become your intelligence. Do you imagine God will do that? If you just go and tell him that I just be my intelligence, be in my brain, be in my nerves, be in the fibers of my body, be in my muscles, be in my bones, be in my breath, be in my blood, be in my heartbeat, be in my circulation. That is how, though He is everywhere in everything, we need to acknowledge Him. Then life will become a marvel and a wonder. As Sri Aurobindo says in Savitri, we'll stop with that, then have question answers. A prayer, a master act, a king idea can link man's strength to transcendent force. What is a prayer? Prayer is something which rises spontaneously from the heart. It is not a prayer book. He has got bored and tired hearing all the prayer books which people are saying mechanically. Say from the heart. Every day you should have a new prayer. Prayer should be spontaneous from the heart. One day my prayer may be, I had a bad night. I want to feel energetic. Give me a little more energy. Another day my prayer may be, I'm so grateful. Third day my prayer may be, oh, today is my exams. Be with me. Fourth day my prayer may be, my dad is very annoyed. Please give some peace to his heart and mind. Fifth day my prayer may be something else. One day I may pray for everybody. May in this world everyone be happy. Let it be a spontaneous prayer rising from the heart. So first way is prayer, which connects us. A prayer, a master act. What is a master act? Whole day, look at your activities. And at the end of at night, just see, was there one act which was done without any selfish desire, any selfish want? An act which was not done for yourself at all. An act which was done in a very unselfish way. Just one act. And for most of us, that itself is a master act. One day, one act done unselfishly. It could be just helping mom in the kitchen. It could be just, taking care of a pet whom you saw, but not for oneself. Taking care of the plants. There are so many actions. We don't have to go outside, but not done for myself, but for somebody else, something else, unselfish act. So that becomes an act which opens the door. Master act. Of course, master act can go right up to Buddha's renunciation, but let us talk about our everyday life. When you want something and somebody else also wants something, and there is only one thing, and you give it to that other person who needs, that is an unselfish act, master act. You have a cloth, an extra piece of dress. All of us have extra dresses. Have you seen when you walk on the road, sometimes you see children, sometimes you see people who don't have enough. Do you feel the urge to give away your dress to somebody? Do you have the urge to come back and tell your parents that, Mom, next time on my birthday, instead of buying me a new dress, will you please spend that money to give it to people who really need it? That's a master act. Okay? So prayer, a master act. A king idea. What is a king idea? The greatest idea that we can conceive of. For example, one day we may feel that what is at the core of everything? And we may say it is love. It's an idea, powerful idea. And that idea can connect us to God. A prayer, a master act, a king idea can link man's strength to transcendence force. Then miracle is made. A common rule. One mighty deed changes the course of things. A lonely thought becomes omnipotent. So take that and let it become inbuilt in the way of life. Last but not the least, the key to life, which we need to really learn, the key is concentration. Without concentration, whatever we may learn, whatever we may have, even to think of God whole day, you need concentration. And concentration, one of the simplest way to practice concentration is whatever you are doing, do it well. Concentration is not about sitting separately and trying to go within. One can do all that. But the simplest way of concentration is, if you are playing, play well. If you are reading, read well. If you are cooking, cook well. If you're feeding a dog, feed the dog well. It should be such a concentration, whatever act we are doing. It should be with such concentration. If you're cleaning a place, clean it with all the concentration in the fingers, the hands, everything. It means to become one. Concentration literally means to become one. In Hindi, the word is ekagrita, ekatra karna. Whatever we may be doing, not with a divided consciousness. So when we learn to become one in whatever we may be doing, then spontaneously we develop the power of concentration. Then it's a question of applying it. We can apply it in the spiritual field, we can apply it in, in the field of world. But this ability to put all of ourselves in whatever is the activity of the moment. It could be just writing a sentence, writing a little piece, even a conversation. Just try that next time when I speak, I'll stay concentrated on the person, listen to the person or a subject. See how our mind runs from one topic to another. So, this power of concentration in a most natural way we can develop. And if we develop it naturally, organically, we can apply it anywhere and in every situation of life. Thank you, children. Always so beautiful to speak to all of you. If you have any questions, I'm available.
You may ask your questions, please.
So you were saying that Gayatri Mantra invokes us for getting knowledge from the divine. But sir, it is not mentioned in anywhere in the Rig Veda that Gayatri Mantra is supposed to give us knowledge. It is actually dedicated to a god Savitar. He is the god of light of the Surya and the god of immovable and movable things. So sir, some people say that it invokes knowledge inside of us, and some say that it is for the protection of us. Some say that Gayatri Mantra is not dedicated to Lord Gayatri. Some say that it is dedicated to Savitar. So what should I do? I'm confused in that.
Yes.
And also Gayatri is not mentioned inside of the Gayatri Mantra. It is mentioned Savitar Tat Savito Varenyam. Ye mighty protect us Savitar. So sir, why is it not said that this is the Savitar Mantra? Why Gayatri Mantra when it is not mentioned in there only?
Gayatri is a meter. Like in poetry, you have different meters. First, we must understand that the Gayatri is the meter in which the mantra has been given. Now, the purpose of mantra was that there are sound rhythms which are also evocative. It was a study done or a discovery made by the rishis that when sound comes out in a certain rhythm, it has its power, which we can understand in everyday life. When you say the same thing in a beautiful rhythmic way, and when you say the same thing in a very harsh way, the effects are different. For instance, if you want to ask knowledge and you say, grant me knowledge, and if you say, grant me knowledge, now there is a difference. So the mantra was a way through which these sounds were, the sound symbols were meant to open the doors to whatever deity we were invoking.
Yes.
Now, in Gayatri Mantra, it is the sun, Savita. So what is the sun? Sun is the symbol of light and heat. He is the creatrix consciousness. That is how we look at the sun. Entire earthly life is managed by the sun. But the most characteristic aspect of the sun is light. So whether we use the word knowledge or light or understanding, essentially we are invoking something in the mind, like a light in the mind, which will give us true knowledge. Now, obviously, this knowledge is not technical knowledge, but it creates a ground for any kind of knowledge. If there is, imagine in a room you want to study anything, you first need light. If light is not there, if it is all dark, then whatever we study, it will always remain imperfect. So through the Gayatri Mantra, the invocation was to make the mind a mind of knowledge, to make our understanding clear as daylight. Now, with this understanding, whatever we read, whatever we see, books that we read, people whom we meet, whatever contact or impact comes within us will be seen in a new light. So it was to mold the mind or to grow in the mind a new kind of light in which we look at the world anew, and then whatever we understand will be a truer understanding and a deeper understanding of the essence of things. To just give an example of the difference. Now, when as a child people used to write an essay on cow. So you can write about cow has four-legged creature, etc., etc. No, it gives milk. All this. This is one understanding of the cow. When we were children, I'm sure your school also has something similar. So what was the first sentence we used about the cow? We used to say, "Gau hamari mata hai." Now it is very strange. कैसे माँ हो गई? Now, if you really now when we look at it, ki how the cow is your mother, it's not about the milk she gives and all these things she give, but it has deep Vedic connotations. That the word cow itself, go, means light. So we are born from the light. It was like right at the beginning, we were told that she is a symbol of light, and light is our origin and not darkness. So now, this understanding, looking at the same cow, one person looks at it as a four-legged animal, and the person is right. Another person looks at the cow and says, she is the symbol of the mother who gives plenty to us. Kamadhenu. She is the giver of things, milk, knowledge. She is the one, everything that comes out of her is nothing but a gift of knowledge. So this is a different, this light which makes us see the same thing differently in a new and more comprehensive way is the light that is being invoked by the Rishi Vishwamitra. Rest is, you see, technical details. It's no point, whether it is written in Rig Veda or whether it is, of course, it is there, but those things are really not important. Get the essence of things. That's what I'm trying to say. Say, for instance, there are people who don't know Sanskrit. Are they to be barred from receiving true knowledge? No. There are people who believe, see, that is how sects are formed, that no, only in this way. For somebody, it works very well through a knowledge of Sanskrit. For somebody else, it may be any kind of language where the person says, I want light. You think God will withhold his light from him? No, he will give it. So this is what we must understand, that while form is important, all this is important, most important is the inner state. If I say Gayatri Mantra every day and I don't have this urge for knowledge, if I do it mechanically, if I do it because my parents have asked me to do it, its effect will be much less than if I do it with the true understanding that I want light in my mind. Of course, I may want light not only in my mind, but in everything, in the body cells. So you can go beyond the mantra. So we will not limit ourselves to anything in this world, because the Vedas are still being written. See, there is an aspiration which many of you may carry. I carry that aspiration. I want light not only in the mind. I want light everywhere, in the darkness, in subconscious, in my physical self. I don't find a prayer written like that in the ancient traditions. Should I stop? No, I must follow my own aspiration. That's what is the essence behind what we are trying to communicate. Okay?
Thank you so much, Alokda, for such an elaborate explanation. I'm sure your concept is clear, Shashwat. Yeah, I can see that. Saransh Mishra has a question, sir.
Sir, I have a question. As you said while speaking, that the name of God is just like a filter. So, sir, can you elaborate on this? Sir, how to practice it and how can it be?
Yeah. So what I meant is that when we name of God is a filter, no, that's what, yes. So this is one of the ways we can look at it. See, when we receive things from the world, we are receiving all kinds of things. We are not aware of it. It's not only the vibration. We are receiving fear, we are receiving jealousies, we are receiving hatred, we are receiving desires, all kinds of things. Imagine when you go to a market, suddenly you feel like buying something. Have you experienced that suddenly you are seized with an anger for no reason? जिसको बोलते हैं ना मूड खराब हो गया. Suddenly there is depression coming in. Why? Because we are surrounded by a sea of vibrations. And it's very difficult to even recognize, let alone cut off. Sometimes the friend with whom I am walking, and a good friend, may be in a bad mood. And without my realizing, I am contaminated with that mood. So we must have some kind of a filter through which automatically everything gets filtered. Now, when we think about God or take his name, it becomes like a surrounding aura around us, like a protective aura when we take God's name. It has that power within it. He comes and he surrounds us. And when he surrounds us, that means everything now that comes, whether it be a virus, whether it be a fear, whether it be jealousy, hatred, it will go through that filter. And when something goes through God, you can imagine what will happen. He will not let any of those things touch us. And even if for some reason they touch us because some spot is weak, he will immediately rectify and mend it. Because that's the power of the filter that we can create. We can use another term like it creates an envelope, protective envelope. That's not really important whether we use filter or not, but it's to filter out the vibrations that we receive from the world. We are not aware of this. We think that it doesn't matter whom we meet, where we go, we attend a marriage, we attend a party, function, we meet people, we watch the television. All this is a sea of vibrations and chaotic vibrations. And the reason there is so much malady in the world. But we cannot isolate ourselves. It's not possible. And we are not meant to. We are meant to be leading in life. So taking God's name creates a kind of buffer all around, like an envelope, which prevents things from entering and directly impacting us. They get modified, they get annulled, and sometimes they will also get transformed. So this is the power of God's name.
Kavish,
Aurobindo has gone on to say, when there will be a change in our entire consciousness, then we don't even have to worry about taking God's name. Automatically there'll be immunity. That is what Shri Krishna tells to Arjuna, that take my name and go through the battle of life. So that even if you fall, whatever may happen, all the time you will be in a safe zone. You will be carried by me. Even death will not come near. It will have to take permission from this surrounding environment. It's the atmosphere of God that becomes the filter.
Sir, you said that God never punishes us for our mistakes, but what about those people who do atrocious things intentionally? Does God punishes them?
What do you think God should do if somebody is doing atrocious things? Can he pass on the buck to the people? They will say, but you are the creator. So what he does is, he changes them. Now, in the course of changing, what we call as punishment is nothing but going through an intensive disciplining method through which people change. It is not punishment. Punishment is a way to look at it. I'll give you an example. Our handwriting is not good. So the teacher asks us to write 10 times. Now we may look at it like a punishment, or we may look at it like a way through which we improve our handwriting. So in God's dictionary, there is nothing like punishment. He cannot pass the responsibility to somebody else. He says, okay, I will help you become better. In that course, he will make us go through experiences which will help us become better and better. So in his consciousness, it is only love. Sometimes where a moms or a teacher deprives us of something, is it because she wants to punish us, or is it because she loves us? So that's what I'm trying to say, that God only loves. But sometimes out of his love for us, when he sees that we are doing things which are very, as you said, atrocious. So she may even say, no, give the remote in my hands. No TV for this 2 hours. Now, this is at a miniature scale. At a mega scale, it would mean taking away from us certain things, which we may think is punishment, but it is because we were misusing those things, and because of which our consciousness was going in a different direction. So that is how he helps us to become better and better. They are not punishments. They are ways of changing us. But he need not go through this way. If we listen to the mom, understand, then, she need not snatch away the remote. So he gives us the option. We can change in a simpler way, in a much better way. But if we resist the change, then sometimes he creates a kind of situation through which change is imposed upon us. But that is never done as an act of punishment. It is always an act of love, because the will behind this action is to change and not to give. By punishment, see, what is the difference? Punishment is where you say you did a wrong thing, Therefore, you are punished. What does it mean? I am paying something for my past. Punishment is looking into the past. And what is change? Change is looking into the future. Whatever I may have done and for whatsoever, I need to become a better human being. That's all that is in God's view. He is always moving in the future tense toward the future. So, what I am doing today may be a consequence of the past, but that's not God's business. His business is to take us toward the future. So that is how we have to look at it. Whereas when we use the word punishment, you did this, therefore you are being punished. But for God, you did this, therefore today this happened, but I will take you to the future through this road or that road. That's what I meant when I said He doesn't punish, but He changes us and helps us. And even when He is taking us through a tough passage, He doesn't leave us. He comes with us. And at any point of time, if we say, God, this is enough, I want to change, I have a sincere will to change, then all the circumstances change, situations change, because He is waiting for that moment to come within. Okay?
Thank you so much, sir, for such beautiful words. Many of my questions are answered, but one question is still not answered. That from the very much like from my past, I've been like listening that our destiny depends on our karma. Whatever we have do in our past life, we will face in a future, or like it will depend on our like, destiny. And destiny here means we cannot decide where we will get birth, like in a poor family or in any rich family, or any in we will go in president's family or anywhere. So it depends on our karmas, what we have done in our past life. So this question is that does our destiny depends on our karmas, whatever we are doing like in our past?
Okay. So implicit within this question, the law of karma basically,
Yes.
is the idea that being born in a rich family is a blessing. What if it is not? What if it is a curse to be born in a rich family? I am taking another extreme. Both Duryodhana and Karna and Arjuna, they're all, if you look at it, Karna's life can be a good example, but look at it like this, that both Arjuna and Duryodhana, or Bhima and Duryodhana, they're both born in rich families. They are both prince. But what they make of that being a prince is what matters. So basically, law of karma is this, that depending upon our past, we have certain things in the present. But it is not a reward or punishment. Reward or punishment is how we deal with it and what we make of it. Duryodhana messed it up by a certain kind of attitude he took towards life. Bhima and Pandavas turned it into a blessing. If you see outwardly, who had a more difficult life? Pandavas or Kauravas? Pandavas, isn't it? Born in the forest, again and again they had to go to the forest. Who had a more difficult life? Draupadi or wife of Duryodhana? Draupadi. And yet, look at the paradox. Yet Krishna is with them. So obviously, if we say that because we did some papa and punya, therefore, we get outer life, then Pandava must have been great papis in their previous life to get this kind of a difficult life, where they lose the game, they have to be abandoned in the forest, born in the forest, they have to fight a gory war even for a little spot for their feet to, eventually they won. But look at the challenge of the life. So basically, this idea that karma and reward and punishment makes it very mechanical. Then where is the role of God? Where is grace? So basically, this thought that it's such a mechanical law has been created by human beings who believe that there should be a mechanical justice. But in real life and in God's vision, justice is not this way. Look at when a tiger chases the deer. Who is likely to win? Most likely tiger. But deer is a nice guy. He is a vegetarian. Why should he lose? That's how we will think. But that's not how nature operates. Nature challenges the deer through the tiger. And therefore, what the deer develops, it develops swiftness and in his own right a speed. What does the tiger develop? Strength and power of stealth. So karma basically means whatever energy we allow in this world, that energy will grow in us. As simple as that. Now, when that energy grows in us, we may use it to good use, we may use it to a bad use. It's that will decide future course. Look at Ghatotkach. He's a Rakshasa's child. All the energies are dark energies. That's why at night he's so powerful. But Ghatotkach has a moment when he has to make a choice, and he puts all his Rakshasi Shaktis at the service of the divine work, and that makes him immortal. So basically, he had increased these energies inside him because he was a Rakshasa and he increased these energies. But he used this energy to a most wonderful work in a war where God himself needed him. So at the end of the day, outer circumstances, whether we are rich, poor, all this is not so important. We give it importance. We think for God also it's a big thing that, he's born in a rich family. A person may be born in a rich family, but full of a very weak body, full of diseases, full of unhappiness. But a person may be born in a poor family, but he may be the one who becomes strong because he has faced the challenge of life. That person may be naturally happy. He may not need anything outside to be happy. So, rich and poor is very often, I can tell you, that being born with all the riches may not necessarily be a blessing. That's what the Bible says, and that's what most of the mystics have said. Because it will make us lazy, it will make us take life for granted. We have never faced the challenge, so we never, we don't bring out the best from within. Whereas when we have challenges in life, then the best comes out. So, which is a blessing? Which is a reward? To have challenges in life or to have comforts in life? So, you see, the way we read God's intention is not exactly how He works towards, When He wants us to grow, He gives us challenges, which may mean extreme situations, maybe a poor family, like Pandavas. But what we do with it, that is again the difference of Karna's life. Karna's life had a challenge. If he wanted, he could have become really an ideal human being. What he did, he made the mission of his life to prove that he is better than Arjuna. What a pitiable aim. He didn't need to do this. So that's how we have to understand that it's not about whether we are born rich or poor. See, look at Krishna himself. He's born in a prison. What a miserable fortune. Look at the life of Rama. They were all God incarnate. So would we say that Rama and Krishna were big sinners? That's why they had such a difficult life. So obviously this popular theory of karma is too mechanical and mathematical to be true. So, and they don't leave any room for grace. As if grace cannot change everything. Grace can change everything. That is what is the lesson of all the great ones. Even in the Gita, you will not find the law of karma speaking all this. This is our own invention. The Gita says if we do karma in a state of darkness, without caring for anything, mechanically, then it tends to cloud us. It tends to make our consciousness dark and heavy. Same karma. And when we do the same karma with an idea of ego and selfishness, desire, it will bring us temporary happiness, temporary sorrow. And when we do the same karma, exactly the same karma, with a sattvic consciousness, with the idea of what is right and what is not right, then it brings into us light and happiness. Exactly the same karma. So what really is karma? Karma is not the outer act, but the state in which we are doing it. That is the whole teaching of the Gita. Krishna is asked to kill. Is it a good karma or a bad karma? Well, if Arjuna did it out of deep-rooted hatred and vengeance, then it won't be a good karma. He may enjoy the kingdom, but he will never really be inwardly happy. But if he does the same karma with the idea, as he does subsequently, that this is the will of the divine for the sake of dharma, to create a better world, India is unsafe in the hands of the likes of Duryodhana. If he does the same karma with this idea, also as a Kshatriya, that it's my duty to protect the, righteous. If I abandon the arms, all those who are subject, they are the ones who will bear the onslaught of a king like Duryodhana. Same karma he does. And he grows into the likeness of God. So karma is not about a mechanical action. It's about the state of consciousness in which we do what we do. And its results are not outer, but inner. It is like when you do a karma in an unselfish way, you feel inwardly joy and peace. When you do the same karma with an extreme inner selfishness, then it takes away our joy and peace. These are the inner results of karma. This is just one example. So, karma is an inner mechanism to help us grow towards vastness, towards light. Its purpose is growth, learning and growth, not reward and punishment. Outer things like richness and poverty, that's not the main consideration. The main consideration is inner richness and inner poverty. There are people who are rich outwardly, but they are poor inside. Is it a blessing? No. There are people who are poor outside, like Kabir, but very rich inside. Is it a punishment that they were poor? No. So let us focus on our inner riches, inner wealth, inner attitudes, inner state of consciousness. And if we have the right consciousness, it doesn't matter what challenges of life we have through whatever karmas in the past. See, this is the problem of the karma theory. It turns back to the past. But what is important is what we can do today. So more than karma is purusharth and grace. This is the set of circumstances I have in life. It doesn't matter because of past life, this life, that life. Now, where do I want to take it further? That is the challenge given to me. And if I just focus on that, life will grow beautiful.
Thank you so much, sir. And it is always so beautiful to listen about that inner fellow inside us. Sir, there were two things that you said. One was that whatever we are releasing in the world is what is increasing within us. And sir, the second is when we are happy from the heart, even less energy lasts longer and enthusiasm develops in us. So, sir, what are the means through which we can keep our heart happy from inside?
Wonderful question. This second one I'll take. First one, tell me later. The way to be happy in the heart is to love. Love yourself, love everybody around, love this world, love plant, trees, animals, love God. Love is the feeder of joy. And whenever a person is deficient in joy, that means there is deficiency of love. Vitamin L is deficient, therefore chemical J, joy, is missing in the system, and therefore disease D is entering into the picture. And why we are unable to feel that love? Because many times, we want somebody to love us. There are one kind of people who develop like, oh, so and so must love me, so and so doesn't love me. So what happens as a result? They are all the time wanting this dose of love from outside. So if they get it, very nice, but you can't get always unlimited dose of love from outside. So they suffer. Whereas if you take it that love is important, let me love. Nobody can stop you from loving this creation. You don't need to have one person to love. Love everything and everybody around you. And you see the heart will be so happy. Even in the extreme adversity, you'll be happy. Why? Because you know how to love. So even if you don't love God, after all, when you love creation, it's a way of loving God only. It is His creation. So when you love this creation, you love God. So love things, love people, love men, love human beings, love animals, love plants, and you see tremendous joy will come inside. And what was the first question about inner and outer?
Yes, sir. Sir, this was answered by this answer. Sir, actually, it was that how can we release joy outside to be happy from inside? So, sir, if we love everyone, then we will release love and get love inside.
Release the energy of love, radiate joy, and it will come back from every side manifold. This world is suffering because of that. Okay? Because we don't know how to love. We have forgotten how to love.
Sir, what is the role of luck in our life?
What is the role of luck in our life? Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So luck is the name, like chance, like random, like fate, when we don't understand how things happen. So there is nothing really like luck, but we use this word because we don't know why things happen or how they happen. So, but what we call as luck is the result of a play of forces. Let us say, for example, that there is a little accident where two cycle people coming from different directions, they clash into each other. Now we use the word luck. Or let us say that we applied for a lottery and we got a lottery. That will be more correct example, isn't it? That somebody applies for a lottery and one gets a lottery, and then we say that it is luck. Now we use the word luck because we don't understand why out of 10,000 people, why did I get it? Or somebody appears in a competition in which 100 get selected and 20,000 don't get selected. Again, we use the word luck because everybody had tried their best and everything. But it is simply because we don't understand that there are many forces that work in the world to create any given event. There is nothing like randomness. But yes, it's too much for our mind to comprehend all the universal forces that are playing around. Therefore, we use the word luck as a way of saying, I don't know how this happened. So luck literally means that I don't know how this happened. I'll give you a little example of the story of Einstein. So Einstein once was going with a friend on a trail and he was lost in his thoughts and he hit a branch of a tree, low branch. And then Einstein suddenly became quiet in a very reflective mood. So the friend asked, what happened? He said, the whole universe conspired to create this event. Is it not true? The fact that the two were there at a point of time, the entire configuration of the universe, which is all the time in motion, in some way or the other, led to this event. And this is a small, insignificant event. What was the probability of this happening? Probably zero. Yet it happened. The same way, all the events that look as random are because there is a very complex world play where all the forces are constantly acting, jostling, and what we see at the end is a last common resultant. Now in that common resultant, what we have done is only one aspect, but not the only aspect. So there are many things which are happening simultaneously. And since we cannot keep track of all those forces, we use the word luck. But what is the way to make sure that all these forces are aligned in a beautiful way? Very simply, that there is the one divine who is the master of creation. He is in every element. And therefore, if we turn to him, then he simultaneously takes care of the entire universe. And of course, keeping us also in as part of the whole play. He is not make it centered around us. That he will not do, because that's not how universe operates. So luck is simply the last end result which is presented to us as a result of a very complex play of the universe. But this is also not the last. What is more important for us should not be why things happened, what happened. The important question is, what do I do with what has happened? That's what our focus should be constantly on the future. I have a lottery. So what do I do now with the lottery? That's more important than how I got a lottery. I may throw away this wonderful chance, or that getting of that money may help me to make my future better. One last story with which we can stop about luck. There's a man who, after death, it's a story. So after death, he goes to, wherever, and he is told that you have been a very horrible person in your life, but you did a few good deeds. So for the good deeds, you will get 3 minutes in heaven. Otherwise, your life will rot in hell till you are reborn. So what do you want first? He says, send me to heaven. So he goes to heaven. He has 3 minutes. What does he do? Now he starts gifting away all the things that are in heaven to everybody. Now, because he is gifting these heavenly things, his future is improving. His length of stay becomes more and more. Now everybody is very nervous. What to do with this man? So they tell him, see, you can't go on like this. So what we are going to do is, we want to tell you, you can ask one boon. And after that, leave heaven. He says, okay. So what is your boon? I want to have the vision of God, Vishnu. So God appears before him And then all those who are attendants around, they say, okay, now your time is up. Come to hell. He says, how can somebody who has the vision of God ever go to hell? Ask him. So Narayana smiles and says, no, he has to be freed now. So you see, his luck was very bad because of his deeds. But he turned it into a great blessing and used it in such a way that those 3 minutes of heaven became for him a means for everlasting immortal life. Okay? So more important is what we do with what we receive.
So actually, I want to ask, you mentioned that God is everywhere, and I really agree that yes, God is everywhere with us, and we can invite and request God to come, and like we can have a chat with him. But I want to ask, sir, like in newspapers, we read this robbery happened, this case happened. Then these questions like linger in my mind. Where was God that time? Like if we take Nirbhaya's case, where God was there? Where was the God when
So,
she
but
was?
that's exactly what I said, that he is everywhere, but we have shut him out. There is something which we have to do. See, that's the whole beauty of the play. It is not like an automatic presence. Otherwise, this world would have been wonderful. But precisely, we have a little role to play. And that's why we must get into, you can take it like this, that you have a phone with you, but you have to activate it. Without activation, it is like an inert presence. So the divine has two aspects. One is like a witness presence, and this witness presence also has a role to play. So as you said in the case of, Nirbhaya case or many other cases, what does he do? He takes, despite all the evil, the pain, the torture and torment, he is the one who gives the inner strength to go through all this, which is unbearable otherwise. Not only to the person who departs, but also to, parents and everybody. He gives that strength. But this is like a silent presence inside. Why doesn't he override everything? Because we need a kind of openness. Otherwise, if he rushes inside with all the strength and everything, we won't be able to bear it. And this play, everybody is involved. It's not just about one person, about all the people involved in the play who are staging this act. But when we start acknowledging the presence and we start inviting him, calling him, then we open the door to the intervention. That's what is important. So the other side of God, where he dynamically engages with us, is where our role comes in. So when we treat him like a passive presence, then he remains like a passive presence. But when we treat him like a living person who can intervene, he will intervene. Now, I don't know about this instance, what was the inner connection with God. But I am sure wherever there has been an inner connection, that is the story of Draupadi. Even in the most dangerous situation, there will be an intervention. But this connection we have to form. So we are given options. See, that is why through these choices we evolve. If I take it that no, I don't care about God, I want to grow with my own strength, God will allow us. He will not say, don't do it. He will say, all right, do it your way. And we'll go through it, learn, grow, go through life, death, all this process. Or we can equally say, well, I will do my bit, but I want you to be with me all the time. Then that road begins to open for us in our life. So while he is there everywhere in everything, we need to form that link. That is what I was trying to say. That to acknowledge the presence, call his name. In fact, if one calls the name, I can tell you even such forces will not come near you. If they come near us, it means we open. If whoever is the person was really calling God's name, and I have seen it in my own life and many other lives, you will see that danger will come and pass away. It will not enter, it will not touch. Last minute there will be an intervention. But unfortunately, this is not a knowledge which we gather. We take it, life is coming, going in its own way. Let's enjoy it. Let's, have some fun. I'm the one. So because of that, we close the doors to the intervention. That's the tragedy, unfortunately. That such a wonderful help is available all the time, but we need to do our bit. Okay?
Sir,
Yes.
I wanted to ask,
that what is the relation between luck and the god. Like if one day we have a bad luck, so we often blame it to god. So like what is the relation between luck and god? Is it because of god only?
There is God, ultimate manager or ultimate Malik, and there are many players in the play. So let's take it like this. You want to build a house, okay?
Yes.
Now you have decided something should happen, but the to build a house means many persons will come into the play. There will be the person who will make the drawing, somebody will lay the bricks, somebody will do the plumbing, somebody will do the electrical thing. Finally the house will be ready. So God is the ultimate owner of this place called universe. But there are many other beings who come into operation to build this world. That is the beauty of this world. It's not like a mechanical automatic system where he built a robo and he pressed the button and robo worked. So that's where these forces come into play, and they create a good house or a bad house. And yet that's the beauty. If you are connected with the owner, he will ensure that the bad house will become a good house, or you will get a house which you need or you deserve. He will have his own way. He will push the forces. That is the difference between those who form a connection with God and those who just let things go their own way. So there are many forces, many beings which will create a situation. Now we use the word bad and good. Actually they don't exist. As I said, that bad and good will depend on what you do with what you get. One may get a small room and turn it a prison into a place of ashram and meditation, like Sri Aurobindo's life. And one may be the president of a most powerful country, and yet mess it up so badly that one is all the time living as if in a prison. So there is nothing like good luck or bad luck. There are situations, circumstances, and how we deal with it and what we do with it, that will turn into something good or bad. So that's what I am saying. That doesn't matter what the situation is. It is what we do with it that is important. And if we do it with connection with the divine, then he will ensure that whatever we are doing, he will add his bit into it and change it into something very beautiful, something which is wonderful, which is like a blessing. Even the most seemingly impossible situation will turn into a great blessing. All right. So thank you so much. Let our life be a blessing of love. God's love.
Thank you so much, Alokji. It's a pleasure listening to you. And such a beautiful thing you said. Life is magic if you live with his presence and talk to it continuously. Children, perhaps, you can live with this thought. You can practice it. The school has always insisted on it. And another one, Karma, is about Purusharth and grace. So let us not go back to my old acts were these. It is what you do, in what kind of consciousness, what act you are doing. I think we can hang on to these two and put them into practice in our life. Then we shall have achieved the aim of this particular talk. Immensely grateful to you. Thank you so much for sparing so much time and answering all the questions so patiently. And I can see the happiness on their face.